And we have people coming in. So we'll just give these guys a few moments to come on in and settle in, and we'll get started.
Great, I just got an email. Somebody was waiting.
Yes.
So welcome, everyone. Thanks for spending your Wednesday. So we'll get started in a minute. Make sure everybody gets out of the waiting room.
I think maybe just one more, Christina. Does that sound about right?
No, I think we're good.
All right, so we're ready to get started. Okay, well, hi everyone, welcome. My name is Janine and I work with Studio West Landscape Architecture and Planning, who is collaborating with California American Water District, and I'm going to be your facilitator this evening. Tonight is on Design Shape Your Space Part 1. So before we get started, I would like to go over some Zoom etiquette to ensure the meeting runs smoothly. First of all, your videos are off during the presentation today to limit distractions. This is so we don't disrupt our speaker as she is presenting and to prevent anything that might restrict anyone's ability to hear the information. There will be several breaks during the presentation where I will ask the instructor any questions I receive through the Q&A, which is located at the bottom of your screen. Or I can unmute you if your hand is raised so that you can ask your question directly. But please do wait for the break to do so. To use the Q&A feature, please just type your question into the boxes at any time. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, please message me directly through the chat function. And if you are new to Zoom, please reference the Zoom participant guide that was sent out with your registration confirmation, and that shows you how to use all of these things. Also, as a note, this meeting is being recorded and may be used or posted online after the class. So before I introduce our instructor this evening, I would like to introduce Christina Saldana, who is a California American Water District representative. Hey, Christina.
Hi, thank you everyone so much for joining us this evening. We're super excited to bring this educational series to you. So for today and tomorrow. And we are also really excited about the turf rebate for this year and to see your guys's water smart landscape and see how beautiful it grows in. This class is going to give you guys so many ideas. And so I'm really excited for you all. So thank you again for joining.
Thank you, Christina. And so now I would like to introduce your instructor and landscape expert for today, Michelle Landis. Michelle is the principal landscape architect and founder of Studio West Landscape Architecture in San Diego, and she has a wealth of knowledge. She is involved in all kinds of projects as a landscape architect. So Michelle, thank you for being here this evening.
Hey, thanks, Janine. Thank you for your warm introduction. Christina, sorry, I forgot to roll ahead to this slide, so I didn't know if you wanted to speak to this particular slide before I go into the design topic.
Sure. So the rebate for California American Water is $1.25 per square foot of turf removed up to 750 square feet. You are always welcome to remove more than that, but at this time, that is the max amount of square feet that we're able to rebate on. And we are also working, just to help everybody as much as possible learn more educationally, the best way to manage your landscape, your new landscape, and how to, just make it better than before. So that's why the educational part is included in the terms and conditions of this rebate.
Thanks, Christina.
Sure.
So, as Janine mentioned, I'm Michelle Landis, and I'm a landscape architect by day, and I'm also an instructor of landscape architecture in the evening at Southwestern College. So I'm always really excited to kind of pass on a lot of the knowledge that we use in the industry, in the design industry, onto our regional residents to help them make sure that when they're reinvesting in their property to remove turf, that they're taking full advantage of that new space that they now have to work with. So real quickly, this program was created by the San Diego County Water Authority. And we all kind of share the same water in the region. So always important to kind of understand where that water comes from. We also have a great partner this year in the County of San Diego Watershed Protection Program, who's been a major funder of the education in the region for reaching out to residential people. So I mentioned, I grew up in Los Angeles. So growing up as a child up there, we would turn on the water would come out of the faucet, and we didn't think much about where it came from. But most of our water in San Diego comes from places pretty far away. Vast majority is coming from the Colorado River. And that has an impact on plants because it tends to be a higher alkaline source of water. We've really done well locally of increasing our local water supply with some big infrastructure projects. And then a percentage of our water comes from Central California. So in 1990, we had this huge drought in San Diego. And if you lived here that long, you may remember this. I remember people hiring contractors to come around and spray paint their dead lawns green because you were not allowed to water your lawn. And so since that extreme drought in 1990, we've had a 38% population growth, 44% increase in jobs, and 93% increase in our gross domestic product. So we actually, though, even with all these increases, are using less water. So potable water use is down 29%, and gallons per capita is down 47%. So good job to all of you for saving water. Most of those savings have come from interior retrofitting of our low flow shower heads and toilets and those requirements. So now we really look to the landscape to see how we can, remain water conscious in a very arid climate. So in San Diego, we are very fortunate to be blessed with this kind of lovely garden-esque landscape. And so I guess what we want to convey in this program is if you are attached to a colorful, green, lush-looking landscape, those can also be water conserving. You don't necessarily have to go to the Arizona look of rock and cactus. You can have a beautiful, vibrant, low maintenance type of landscape. So whatever suits your aesthetics and your needs is what we're here to help you develop. So we have this case study house, and you can see that there's this interior courtyard that's already been walled off. So probably in recent history, a lot of lawn was already removed from this property and made into kind of an outdoor room type use. But you've got these remaining patches in front. And probably, if I had to take a guess, there's probably not kids playing ball out there or anybody sunning themselves out on that lawn. That lawn is probably just a single use item, so a big investment of your maintenance dollars and your water dollars to maintain that. And probably the only use it gets is the mow and blow guy who comes by every couple weeks and charges you money to maintain it, or the neighborhood's dogs. So we would say that's a really great patch of turf to target and turn into a beautiful water smart landscape. So this is what renovation of that case study house looks like at initial planting. And I always like when we hold these sessions in person because I ask people, what do they think about this new landscape? And generally the response is they laugh a little bit nervously and tell me it looks sparse. And I would agree. At initial planting, a well thought out design tends to look sparse. And that's because the plants have been selected for low maintenance in addition to low water use. So the plants have been placed to fill out to their full size at maturity and not cause a lot of extra trimming of the shrubs and making you spend more time outside doing not fun chores instead of out doing fun things that we get to do in San Diego. So this is what that same landscape looks like about 6 months after installation. You can see this low growing ground cover along the front. This is a nice turf replacement type ground cover. I was starting to fill in. These mid-ground shrubs are starting to fill out a little bit. At 1 year, you really start seeing that turf replacement ground cover along the front and those mid-ground shrubs being nice and filled out now. And then 2 years after installation is what we consider established. So we actually consider it to be 2 rainy seasons after installation. So now you can see that turf replacement ground cover. This is a low water use plant. This particular one is called silver carpet or Diamondia margaritae. And it's a nice walkable surface, handles occasional traffic, probably not kids playing ball every day. But then you've got this nice mid-ground of medium-sized shrubs with a lot of different interest in the shapes of their leaves. And we'll be talking about some of the design principles we use to create that tonight. And now these background shrubs have reached their pretty full height, and they're starting to really soften that wall and provide a backdrop. So a nice layered effect to the planting here. So, and just some more features of the landscape, some terracotta pots and boulders kind of provide some interest in this kind of what we would call a view garden type strategy for this particular yard. Okay, so just so you know that there's some nice resources for you to complement this material. I'll show you where you can access the homeowner's guide to a water smart landscape. This includes a lot of plant palettes in the back. And we'll talk about that at the end of the next session and introduce you to a few of those. And that's one challenge we found in this, in running these education series for a while, is that we can grow so many plants in Southern California that plant selection can be challenging because there's thousands of plants to choose from. So we've done a lot of the homework in trying to figure out how much water they use, what size they get to. There's also some really nice videos on demand, and those really help supplement some of the concepts you're going to learn tonight. And you'll see interviews with industry professionals and residents as they're going through their own transformation processes. So I recommend you check those out. Designed for the YouTube crowd, usually about 5 to 7 minutes each, and definitely have some great information in there. And so you guys are focused, we're focusing on design. So we've got parts 1 and 2 of this design for homeowners special topic. So it's really designed to be a 3-hour tour. We're going to set our water conservation target, teach you how to reimagine your space and how to utilize plants in your new space. So this whole program is designed against a 6-step process for converting your turf, and we're going to review, going to string together a few of these steps together and really focus on the design step 4. But our ultimate goal is to help you develop the knowledge and skills necessary to create your own beautiful water efficient landscape. And I imagine that Christina will make some slides available to you if you have the need, if you'd like to read through on a Kindle. So these are the typical reasons that people take this class. They want to learn how to conserve water, capture water in the landscape, reimagine their yard, create a design that works for your lifestyle. And I think that's actually something that not a lot of people think about. That's what we like to teach you in this class, is how to think about how you're going to use the space and then create a design that responds to those uses. And then we'll point you to some designer resources if you feel like you need some extra help. So one of the reasons that we target turf and install a water efficient landscape is plants have the same strategy to keep cool as people do. And so plants sweat just like we do when it's hot. And if they happen to be located by the beach, just like us on a hot summer day, they sweat less than if they're located inland. And so we're very fortunate in California. We have this wonderful system that's been developed for our agriculture in our state that really tracks the water usage of plants in each region. So if you had a patch of cool season turf, that would be like the fescue that we all start with when we buy sod, and your house was located in La Jolla or in Imperial Beach or Coronado, you could expect that turf to use 33 inches of water per year to stay healthy and green. If you happen to live in Alpine or Poway in this green zone, the foothill zone, that same patch of turf would need 55 inches of water per year. So that becomes important. because generally in our region, we get about 10 inches of water a year. So that means the remainder of the water we need to import. And sometimes that can be a very expensive part of our household budget is, bringing that water in from places far away or expensive resources locally. So if you look at turf from a regional perspective, it's one of the reasons we target it for removing it and replacing it with plants that are more in sync with our water cycle. So if we look to a place that has a similar climate that supports turf well, we would have to look to a place like Portland, Oregon would be a great example. They get about 40 inches of rainfall a year. You can see there's no irrigation heads in that patch of turf because it's kind of climate appropriately if you're up in the Pacific Northwest. They have a maintenance problem where they hire people to scrape moss off the walls and keep that under control. So we happen to live in a Mediterranean climate. And the really wonderful thing about that, it means we get to be outside most days of the year. We have a beautiful year-round temperature. It gets a little hot a couple of weeks in summer and a little cold for a month or so in winter. But in general, it's a pretty temperate climate. But it's also characterized by receiving our rain in the cool season over a very short period of time, usually 3 to 4 months. And then we have long dry periods with no supplemental rainfall. So other areas around the world have that same Mediterranean climate. We think most consistently with the Mediterranean basin in Europe, but also locations in Chile, South Africa, and South Australia. So when we want water conserving plants, we look to plants that have a similar climate so that they can adapt to ours. So this beige kind of bell curve in the back of this kind of graphic is a typical turf or horticultural plant. Turf is the highest water, one of our highest water users. But even if you had a lower water use typical horticultural plant, they're going to have that same bell curve. So they are looking for their peak supply of water right in July, August, June, July, August, which happens to be right when we don't have a lot of available water. When you look at native and Mediterranean plants, they sync more closely to our natural rainfall cycle. They tend to be cool season growers. So they're growing they're looking for their maximum water demand right when we get it in January, February, March. And then they have strategies to kind of shut down or conserve water when you go into the heat of summer. So if you're from the Midwest, you think about the deciduous trees in the Midwest that drop their leaves because that helps them survive through the winter, right? So we have a lot of plants with this strategy of what we call drought deciduous, where they might drop their leaves and look like brown crispy sticks right in the heat of summer. And that's actually a drought adaptation survival adaptation. So there's other adaptations besides that, but a lot of our native plants tend to have that look. So from a regional perspective, we target turf because it's easy water savings. Landscapes can be retrofitted for water efficiency relatively easily. We've got to get you some skills and technical knowledge, and that is our goal, to educate you to succeed. So the first step in the process is we really want you to identify your landscape target. And that, when we're talking of water conservation, that really becomes a factor of how efficient is our irrigation system and how much water do our plants need. And so when we have very low or low water use plants combined with a high efficiency irrigation, we end up in this kind of 2 to 3 star rating. So be thinking about what's your target. And then just a quick note on how to understand irrigation efficiency. Most of you probably have these conventional overhead sprays in your front yard or your turf area. And these are what we consider low efficiency or high precipitation or high rain, fast rain. Excuse me. And what happens is this older technology of overhead sprays puts out water very, very quickly, usually so fast that the ground can't absorb that much water. And so the water tends to move off laterally and then end up in the storm drain and out into our creeks and out to the ocean. The newer technology overhead spray are what we consider medium efficiency. They are low precipitation nozzles that we can add on to our conventional overhead spray, just changing out the nozzle. And that helps bring our water use up. What happens with these heads is that they run, they put out a lot less water, so you run them a little bit longer, but water has time to infiltrate into the soil and get to where your plants can access it. And then high efficiency irrigation is drip irrigation or pressure compensating bubblers. And I'm going to show you really quickly how easy it is to retrofit your irrigation head. So this is what a sprinkler body looks like. And if it was buried, it would be up to just this top piece sticking out. But you can actually pull up this center piece and have a good set of strong hands, or there's little clamps that you can buy to keep these up. And you can simply take off this old inefficient irrigation nozzle and replace it with a similar radius, medium efficiency rotating stream nozzles, and it just screws right on. And that's a retrofit. And so we like to teach you guys some of these strategies because the landscape contractors are more than happy to rip out your whole irrigation system and replace it while you pay for it. So that's not always desirable. Sometimes we have mature trees and we don't want to dig around the trees or trench through the root zones. So sometimes we can just harness the lateral lines that are in the ground and just change the distribution part at the top. You can also use, this product is called a Rainbird Retro 1800. Again, it looks just like a spray body, but what is inside of it is kind of fun because it has a filter and a pressure regulator. So it drops the pressure down and it filters the water in a suitable way for drip irrigation. So you can change the heads, and if your head is at least 6 inches deep, you can actually just pull the guts out of one of these retro 1800s and replace the guts. You don't even have to dig this piece up. But then there's all these little adapters at the top. This one's for inline drip irrigation. We like that because it is lower maintenance, but you can just convert your heads and then attach your drip irrigation tubing and run it out to your plants. So inline drip irrigation, a little bit less maintenance intensive than the point sourced or spaghetti tubing irrigation. And that's because the little emitters are molded right into the plastic and they have little check valves. So they close, they don't clog as easily, and they don't pop apart like all those little T fittings on the spaghetti tubing. So a couple products just to be aware of. So pretty easy to retrofit your yard for irrigation efficiency. And then here's just a little bit more understanding on the different water uses of plants. So we have very low, which we consider many of our native species, and adapted species. This would be like from, desert climates. We have low water use, which are plants from similar climates, so other Mediterranean climates. Medium are kind of our standard horticultural plants that we've historically used. And then medium high are turf and other thirsty plants. And these have really fallen out of favor as the cost of water has increased. So step 2 in this process is to create a basic plot plan for your yard. So sometimes you can go into a satellite program like Google Maps, Google Earth Pro. You can turn on the satellite view in Google Maps. And if you don't have a lot of big trees and there happens to be good publicly available satellite information, sometimes you can just zoom into your property and print out a map. There's usually a way to select a scale and print that out. I know that's a feature in Google Earth Pro, which is a free program. So you can check that out. The more traditional way to create a base plan is to actually measure your property. So you can see we've got one measurement starting at the edge of the curve. We've got about 5 feet for this parkway, 4 feet for the sidewalk, 15 feet back to this little landing, which is 2 feet deep, and then 22 feet down to the edge of the wall. We've got a walkway that's 5 feet wide. And so you can record those measurements. And then a very easy way to create a scaled base plan is to just simply get some grid paper. So grid paper comes in a range of sizes. For most typical residential properties like our case study house, 1/4 inch grid works really well. If you have a larger property, usually 1/8 inch grid can work well. If you have a huge property out in a state out somewhere, we can also go into engineering grids, which is 10 or 20 squares per inch. But so you can see that these measurements have been transposed onto this grid paper simply by counting squares. So we talked about the edge of the curb back to the edge of the parkway being about 5 feet. So you can see your standard schoolhouse ruler. You can just measure those 1/4 inches or let the grid paper do the hard work for you and plot out your measurements on that paper. Always a good idea to note which direction is north and then list the scale. That'll be helpful to your contractor. And also we like to keep track of north because north can be a shady exposure for plants. So sometimes if there was a big wall there and planting on the north side of that wall, we would know that would be very shady and we might have to pick different plant species. So measuring in scale, so we as architects and landscape architects tend to use these, triple bladed scale tools, but know that you can measure to scale with your standard schoolhouse ruler. So if we're looking at 1/4 scale, we're really just counting the 1/4 inches along that ruler. So you can see that this line right here drawn at a 1/4 scale is 5 1/4 inches. So it would be 5 feet long. This same line is using 1/8 inch scale. So now we're just counting the 1/8 inch hatch marks, and that would also be 5 feet long. If we were using an architectural scale, they tend to double up on the blades. So there's one blade that's marked 1/8 inch and one that's marked 1/4 inch. For the 1/4 inch scale, you would line up the edge of your line starting at 0, and then you would simply count the 1/4 inches. It's nice because the architectural scales and engineering scales kind of keep track of the count for you. So because we started with this lower 0, that's the row of numbers we're using on the bottom. So you can see here's 4 feet, and then one more is 5 feet. And then if we were using the 1/8 inch blade of the scale, we would line up the edge of our line with 0 and march over. And you can see now we're using these upper numbers. So that would be a 5 foot line. And that's the only difference between a schoolhouse ruler and an architectural ruler. Similar with an engineering scale. So if you happen to have a big estate and you're trying to create a base plan, we typically see those being measured in what we call a 1/10 inch scale, 10 scale or 20 scale, similar to a decimal ruler. So instead of breaking up an inch into 16 pieces like a schoolhouse ruler, the decimal ruler is breaking that up into 10 pieces. And the engineering scales kind of do the same. The challenge with engineering scales is you have to remember to add a 0 onto the end because they're used for 10 scale, 100 scale, 1,000 scale. So it's up to you to keep the zeros straight. So on this one at 10 scale, you can see we have 8 hatch marks. So that is where 8 feet would be. If we had it all the way to here, it would be 10 feet. We'd have to add that 0. Same for 20 scale, a little bit smaller and harder on the eyes, but you would simply count these hatch marks, and that would be 8 feet long there. And if all of that is very stressful on base sheet measuring and scaling, you can always use the flag method. So the important thing is to plan for your landscape so that you space the plants accordingly when they're young, just like our case study project, so that it doesn't become overplanted as they start to mature. So you could buy these little pin flags. A lot of the irrigation wholesale houses have these. I imagine Home Depot has them, or the big box stores. I walked around Home Depot lost trying to find them the other weekend, and I did not find them there. So I'm not quite sure if they carry them, but I know all the irrigation supply houses. We'll look at a few of those resources at the end. But you could just space out these different colored flags, and each flag is a different type of shrub. And then count how many flags you have of each type so that you know to buy the appropriate amount. And then you could even take a picture with the flags and lay a piece of tracing paper over it and kind of sketch out what the planting might look like, if that's easier for you. And then we also need to evaluate our site as we're preparing for design. So really important in the success of plants and how water moves through the soil to understand what our soil texture is and our soil percolation is. So soil is broken into different soil separates, and these are really just pieces of weathered rock. So we have large weathered rock, which would be our sand particles. And all you guys attending this, I know live close to the beach. So I know you've been to the beach and picked up sand, and you can see the little grains with your naked eye. In the world of soil, that's a very large soil particle. Then we have the silt sized particle, which are medium sized, and our clay, which are very, very small and definitely can't be seen with a naked eye. And then loam is a mixture of all particle types together. Most of our region falls into a loam range, either a sand loam, a true loam, or a clay loam. Where you guys are located, many of you guys are going to have sand, which is actually one of the, in some ways, some of the easier soil texture to work with, because you have a lot of variety in what you can plant. You're not as impeded by poor drainage as some of these, mesa tops and clay areas. So sand happens to have water move very quickly through the soil profile. It tends to wash out nutrients and water very quickly. So water doesn't stay up close where the plants can access it. Silt is kind of our medium-sized category. It holds water in a medium well fashion, so the plants have some access to that water, and it also will hold nutrients up by the plants too. Clay is a very slow draining soil. Once it gets wet, it stays wet for a really long time. It doesn't really release that water even to plants easily. It also holds a lot of nutrients, but again, it holds them so tight, the plants sometimes can't access those nutrients. Loam soil acts a lot like silt soil, right in that mid-range. So to determine your soil texture, you'll want to dig a hole in your yard, first by removing the mulch or surface matter. I like to have people dig a 12-inch by 12-inch by 12-inch hole, because we're going to use that same hole again for an infiltration test in a minute. And then you're going to take a soil sample from the side of the hole, at least 6 inches down. And one of the easiest ways to check your soil texture is do what's called a mason jar test. So I have an example of that here. I'm going to hold up in my screen. And by the way, there is a view setting, so you can kind of move how big the slide is and how big the speaker is. I like to be on the gallery view. That works really well for me. But you can see I've got this soil mason jar, and you can kind of get a sense of the layers. There's a lot of reflection off my light here, off the windows. But I'm just going to go ahead and shake it up. So I have about 50% soil, about 50% water. I'm going to shake it up really well. And you'll notice that my soil, all those layers that you just saw in the little window, they all look the same color. So in this graphic, it's kind of deceiving because the sand looks like beach sand. The kind of silt layer looks like a rich, organic black soil like you'd have if you lived in Illinois. And the clay looks like terracotta clay. So generally, the same rock is being weathered. So it's all about the same color, the different particle size. So you can't always visually tell 100%. So I like to, when I do this test, I like to do it with kind of timing it too. So I shake it up really well, looks kind of like chocolate milk, and I turn that that jar upside down, or right, set it upright. And the first 2 to 3 seconds, you're going to see the sand settle out. Sand's very heavy, it falls down quickly. And then over the next 3 to 5 minutes will be the silt settling out. So I could mark where the sand settles down, wait about 5 minutes, mark where my silt is settled down, and then the clay will remain suspended in the water for an hour to a week. Just depends on how fine those particles are on. So you just kind of set it in a place that won't be disturbed for a while. And when it's all settled out, you can look at the percentages of sand, silt, and clay in your jar. And so if we take this middle category and assume that we have 40% sand, right down here, this is what's called the USDA soil texture pyramid. And you can see that each edge of the pyramid is a different soil separate. So I'm going to start on the sand side, and I said we have 40% of sand, and that would be the line that I would travel up. I'm going to go to the silt side. I'm going to say we also have 40% silt. So I'm going to travel down this side from the low number to the higher number. And where those two lines intercept, right, is about right here. It's right in a loam category, right in mid-center. And then I would have 20% clay under that scenario. So it'll help you select what your soil texture is, which is important because that's going to help you determine what kind of plants will grow well and how well your soil is likely to handle water infiltrating, and what your irrigation schedule can be. That's an important one too. So we use that texture to understand how our soil handles water. So infiltration is affected by the soil texture, any soil aggregation, and any layers of compaction or rock. So sometimes in the coastal areas, I've run into layers of old marine fossils that act like layers of concrete. So even though I have a sandy or loamy soil, I'm not allowed to infiltrate my water. So that's why texture is one understanding, but also the infiltration. So just to show you an example, I mentioned I teach at Southwestern College. We have very heavy clay, Diablo clay is what they call it, in our botanic garden. So this is some big clods of clay that I pulled out of kind of an unused area in our garden. And so you can see they're big and blocky. They don't support plants well. And then about 3 feet to the side of that, I pulled some samples from an area where the groundspeople had piled some mulch, and the mulch had broken down. And what that does is it starts to aggregate that soil, and it starts to change the way that soil reacts to water and plant growth. And so you can kind of see that it's no longer these big blocks. It's a darker, richer soil, and it's got these little tiny aggregates in it. And so that's a really healthy soil that we've been able to shift from blocky clay to something that supports plants well. So we want to understand how water moves through our soil. We're going to dig that 12 by 12 by 12 inch hole, and you're going to fill that hole with water once to saturate the area. Now, I used to live in Pacific Beach, so it would take about 3 minutes to drain a 12-inch hole. It was just solid sand with seashells in it. So you guys might have that same condition. So fill it once, let it drain down. If that's very quickly, then you don't have to wait overnight. You can just fill it again. So once it's been saturated, we lay a stick over the top of the hole, refill that hole with water, wait an hour, and measure how far the water levels dropped to determine that infiltration rate per hour. I like to, if you have a slower draining soil, area, I like to come back at several times, maybe every hour for 3 or 4 hours, measure how much it's dropping, and then average it out to make sure I'm getting an accurate infiltration. But with you guys being coastally, you might have a very rapid infiltration. So we say less than 1 inch per hour is slow draining. And some of the solutions to that are adding organics to the soil, like compost, or like I mentioned, some of the mulch on top that starts to break down and aggregate the soil and allows better drainage. We're going to select tolerant plants. So a lot of those really arid climate succulents like the Arizona cactus and some of our true really desert natives do not like water sitting close to them. They're very intolerant of that condition. They're not adapted to that. So you'll start seeing the succulents start to get these black spots on it. It just means that they can't tolerate that much water around them. So if we wanted to plant with very low water succulents, we might have to import some better draining soil, more sandy loam soil, and create some mounds so that we can plant those specimens and allow the water to drain away from their roots. If you're in the 1 inch to 3 inches per hour, that's kind of your sweet spot. It's water's draining fast, so it's not impeding the plant's ability to grow. It's not sitting in water, but there's still enough water being maintained up by the plants so that it can access water and not be drying out all the time. And then we say more than 3 inches per hour is fast draining. And so sometimes we need to slow that water down, and that happens a lot in the beach areas. So again, we would add those organics, and that would start to form this aggregation. And what happens with the aggregation is it actually holds a glaze of water around each one of those little aggregates. And then it keeps the water up close to the roots of the plants. So this is where our tolerant plants for fast draining would be those succulents and arid climate plants that don't like wet feet. And if we wanted a more lush green type of landscape, we might create mounds with richer, slower draining soil so that it could support having more water available. So we're going to pause for a break, and we're going to jump into landscape design right here and see if there's questions.
There are no questions so far.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'm unavailable if somebody thinks of something, just in case.
I know it's a small group, so you can also raise your hand if you know, we went rapidly through all kinds of horticultural science. So if you had any questions about some of those things, I'm going to talk real quickly then on questions I usually get at this point is what kind of organics? How do you amend for soil? We have some really great landscape recycling companies in the region. The Otay recycling, green waste recycling site. Agri-Service is out there. They create a really nice range of locally produced product from our trimmings of our trees. And they're actually the ones who donated some of these lovely samples, but they make a nice compost. So this is something that we add in the soil to start that aggregation process when we're making new plantings. We might add 30% if it's kind of our more typical horticultural species. If it's some of those natives or very arid climate succulent plants, we might only add 15% of this. But you can see it's a finely screened material. It's all organic material. So it's not any of the mineral component, it's the organic component. And what this does is it starts that aggregation, and it also jump starts the soil biology to support new plant growth. So that's how we add it in the soil. There's also composted mulch. So this is gone through the same process of kind of heating, they kind of have an internal heat as it sits in these windrows that kills off any weed seeds and pathogens. And then at the end, after it's sat for a certain amount of time and they've turned it a certain amount of times, they screen it, and they screen it into a compost amendment, so in the soil, and then a compost mulch, which goes on top of the soil. And that's great if you happen to have trees that are, mature trees you want to protect, and you still want to start improving your soil health. You can put this compost mulch down in those existing plants, and it will break down and start that aggregation process like the samples I showed you from Southwestern. There's also brush mulch, which is again all the fine plant parts, and that is similar to the composted mulch, but it hasn't been heated to sterilize it. And then you have wood mulch. So wood mulch is not really what we consider a soil building mulch. It does keep the area more moist, but it doesn't break down quickly and start feeding the soil. So I think most people think of mulching as wood, but we really like these blended or composted mulches.
Michelle, may I
Yes.
just interrupt for a very quick second?
Uh-huh.
If we're showing more props, if you have more mulches, maybe if you could stop sharing your screen, and then I think that makes your screen go larger.
Oh, okay, that's a great idea. And is anybody saying they would like to see it larger? You can also,
Not at the moment, but you know.
yeah, and you guys can also set it on the, for those of you watching live, you can set it on the speaker view, so that makes the slides smaller and the whatever's talking larger. So good. That's I think important in understanding the soil health to support your new plants. So if there's still no questions, I'm going to jump forward with design.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. And no more questions, right? Okay. And Christine, I saw you jump on. Did you have anything you want to add to that mulch discussion?
I actually wanted to see if you could talk about the colored mulches. I know that there's a lot of those out there and they seem to be really popular. I saw like pallets at the store the other night.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, so I see those at a lot of the big box stores. So they're usually imported from another area. And they use kind of dyes to make those different colors. So even the brown is dyed to be kind of a consistent color. So a lot of times those aren't locally sourced products. So they're not all that sustainable because they're being shipped from long ways and then go through this dyeing process. I'm a little bit of more of a sustainability purist and thinking, why would I want to add dyes into my landscape? It's just one more chemical type thing that I'm having my plants having to overcome. So I'm not personally a fan of them, but I know they're readily available at the big box stores. So unfortunately, these brush mulches, which are your Optimum Health, are harder to find. Some of the nurseries, I've seen Walter Anderson Nursery carries a Kellogg brand of kind of a brush mulch, but you really have to go a little bit further away to some of the landfills locally to get this locally produced product.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. So as we're jumping into the core of this class, which is about landscape design, we want you to think about landscape design in the same way you'd think about making and decorating a cake. So when you're considering a cake, you don't start by creating the icing roses. That's kind of one of the last things you do. You start by thinking about what flavor of cake you want. You mix the batter for the cake grounds. You put them in the oven. You bake them carefully. You cool them. You do your base coat of icing and stack them. And then you get to the fun, colorful, pretty, decorative things that is the finishing touches of this icing cake. So we really want you to step back in design and think about the functionality of your space and what that space can become and how you're going to use it. And then we will get to the fun, pretty, aesthetic, decorative elements of that landscape design. So we explored landscape design as two parts. The first is in shaping spaces and thinking about how you will use the space. And that considers things like your arrangement of those subspaces, where major elements might be located, thinking three-dimensionally. Landscape design is kind of tricky because it's not just a two-dimensional surface like a canvas with paint. We're designing in 3 dimensions, and then we also have a time factor and a seasonal factor to that landscape. And we really want to establish the functionality of the new space and then think about how the forms or the shapes within that space evolve. And then we get to those aesthetics like color and texture and all the fun things. If you have any experience in any kind of design, you're familiar with that design language. So we'll show you how to apply that to landscape design. And then we focus on planting design and how we fill that space with plants for effective design. So when we're considering a turf renovation project, we have this wonderful opportunity to rethink our yard. And a lot of times, maybe we have a small house and maybe we don't have a big backyard. So we think, oh, I'd really like a bigger house. Well, we have this beautiful climate. So you are able to take that removed turf and create outdoor rooms where you can be outside most days of the year. Maybe you're hemmed in by the little tiny walkway that the developer built to your front door that's 3 feet wide because that's the bare minimum they could get away with. And maybe you would like a more graceful pathway into your garden, into your house. So we can think about the solution for what that turf becomes as a pathway. Or maybe you have a big extensive backyard with lots of entertainment amenities and you're like, I don't want to be in front. I don't want to hang out with my neighbors. I want to go play in my backyard and I just want the front to kind of look good from people passing by. So we might pick a solution that's more of a view garden for your turf replacement area. So thinking about the functionality of those spaces, we look at outdoor rooms. Just like interior rooms, rooms tend to have walls. So they don't need to be solid walls to create a sense of enclosure. Here's a low wall that was solid with a nice bougainvillea hanging over it, kind of defining the edge of this room. You could have a row of shrubs if you wanted privacy. They could be tall or short. So it doesn't have to be a constructed type of wall. And then we think about the floors and how much usage that those are going to get. So in this condition here, we've got flagstone and we've used landscape joints between it. So that's not going to take use all the time. You know, if you have every day you open up to doors and there's people in and out, you know, someone's heel could get stuck in the little landscape joint, but it does retain that permeability of that space. So that can be nice. And it does double up really nice. Maybe if you have parties every, few months where the family comes over and you can put tables around in this spot. I think it holds up pretty well to that use. On the other hand, this is flagstone that's grouted and it has kind of, it's laid on a bed of concrete, and then they almost use the stone like tile on top of it and grout the middle. So it's a very stable stone surface. And you can see this house has doors that open up and people can circulate in and out. This tends to be a pricey surface also, but it holds up well to a lot of traffic. It's a very stable surface. It's not permeable. So some agencies require permeability for their landscape turf renovations. So you'll want to check with Christina. That might be a good question to ask her. So no, that solution creates a nice indoor-outdoor room. This creates a nice kind of seasonal use room, I'll say, or less used room. And then sometimes we like to include ceilings in our room. So in this case, you've got this probably tile overhead that's rainproof. It probably matches the tile roof on the house, but you could sit outside under that even in rain. In this case, you've got a beautiful shade tree that you can sit under and string lights across, and it provides that ceiling atmosphere. You don't necessarily have to have a ceiling in an outdoor room, but it may be something to consider, especially if you've got a sunny southern exposure where it can get quite hot. And then passageways. So we like to think about wayfinding, and we'll talk about that more in the next session. But wayfinding is cues in the landscape that make it easy to follow. It kind of gives us cues on which direction to go. Sometimes we like to put little surprise elements or interesting elements along the journey to keep it interesting. And think about peek a view, as you come through, maybe another view opens up or some mystery along your pathways. Here's another example of a pathway. Maybe the entrance to this house is on the side. And so you've got this bit of a journey. You can see, again, these are both solutions with the flagstones with the landscape joints to provide that permeability. But you can also make this a solid concrete path, just to check your rebate requirements for getting your full rebate. What I like about this solution is they've kind of used this burgundy foliage on this journey to kind of keep it interesting and unite that journey. So it kind of keeps some interest here, and there's some little decorative features. That looks like a Japanese stone lantern and some boulders. So again, there's that kind of interest as you go down this path. So great turf replacement type project. View gardens. So our case study house was definitely a view garden. Probably that homeowner had a lot of amenities in back and they didn't want to be out in front maintaining their landscape out there. So they've got a beautiful assemblage of plants that are interesting to their neighbors, and they don't have to spend a lot of time or money maintaining. And then this is an example of a project I worked up in San Juan Capistrano, where this is actually a stormwater swale. So the water sheds from the driveway, and it's meant to be like a California wildflower meadow effect, but water goes in there and it infiltrates down and it's kind of recharging the soil water, and still is a very attractive view garden. So solving a couple different landscape design strategies there. Sometimes in view gardens, if they're extensive, if it's a big front yard, you would want to include some small maintenance paths for wandering amongst the plants, and like planting islands so that you can get in and deadhead flowers. Or I see a lot of our participants in these programs like maybe a pollinator garden. So they're really going with that view garden, but bringing in pollinator species to bring hummingbirds and butterflies and into their landscape and activate it a bit. And then the other take on a view garden is also looking beyond your properties to look if there's views to borrow and bring them into your landscape. So this is a house up in Point Loma, a fabulous site. Almost looks like they own San Diego Bay and North Island, but there was a lot of careful planning done here. You can see the way the water in this spa matches the water of the bay, and we play with plaster colors to get that just right. But ultimately, this is a borrowed landscape, and it makes that yard seem much bigger than it if it turned its back to that view and maybe had shrubs here. It would seem like a tiny little yard. So think about looking beyond the perimeter of your property. Maybe there's a nice view that shrubs have grown up and it's no longer something you're conscious of. Maybe somebody planted shrubs 20 years ago. And if you take those particular shrubs down, you can access a view. So be on the lookout if you have advantages like that. And so form follows function, and it's going to define how our space will be used, what activities will occur there. We have active uses like cooking, eating, entertaining, sports, play, pool, and pets. Food growing, if you like to plant edible gardens. Passive uses might include resting, meditation, and viewing. Think about your current layout. Does it work, or does it need to change to be more functional? And a lot of times people end up being limited by the bed lines of their turf. Maybe there's a mow curb there. So we encourage you to think about the area as an entire space and plan for it. Those little mow curb strips are pretty easy to remove. So maybe there's an advantage to doing that and really making that new space work for you. So think about how the space could be used, not how it's used. Going back to those outdoor room, garden, pathway, or a combination of those. Do you want to add seating areas? How about pathways through planting islands? Do you need to wander through your yard with a circular route? So thinking outside the box, what types of things do you like to do? This is a nice little bocce ball court someone added into their turf removal project. So here's kind of one of our past participants, pretty big swatch of turf to maintain, not all that attractive. They're on a busy street, so they're not really going to want to hang out there. So I think they did a nice job creating this kind of almost a view garden, but then they've got a little bench, reducing the amount of water use out there, some big swatches of color. Here's an example. This participant lived on the corner of a cul-de-sac, and they had the type of neighbors where they all had these 4th of July parties, and the kids would be out running from one house to another. And they identified that they'd really like an outdoor room so that everybody could kind of gather in front when these events were happening. They had this kind of strange patch of turf where it's got a little flat area, but then it kind of sloped down. So it wasn't that much usable turf that was a flat area. So what they decided to do was actually flatten out more of the slope and then make the sloped area a little bit steeper in slope. So now they've got this nice outdoor room where they can set out tables when there's these neighborhood events. And then they wrapped the slope with some nice Mediterranean plants. And that space is really now fitting their lifestyle a lot better. Okay, so we start this kind of functional analysis and starting to take a pen to paper by doing what we call these functional use diagrams or conceptual bubble diagrams. They go by a lot of different names. So if we're looking at a solution that's maybe an outdoor room, we usually closer to the house in the more private area of the front yard, if that's where your spot is. We could create a little space for that outdoor room. And then maybe you have that condition that I see with a lot of people where they always keep the front window closed, because when you have lawn in this whole area, anybody walking down the sidewalk can look right into your house. So maybe you can create a condition where you have a little bit taller plants, providing a low screen that allows you to keep these curtains open more often, and you can kind of look out into this little outdoor room space from inside your house with a sense of privacy. You can see the front part of this yard is kind of like the view garden strategy, right? Where it's got tall, medium, and low plants. So this is a pretty big front yard, and they've kind of split those two solutions. You can see they've planned for the circulation around their yards. So in this case, they need to get to both side yards. Maybe they have a gate on both sides, or maybe there's meters over here for the gas meter person needs to come and read the meter every so often. Maybe their neighbors have parked a giant, ugly motorhome right next to them, and they don't really want to look at that every day when they walk out the door. So they've planted some taller screening plants to give a little bit more privacy, almost creating a green wall to that outdoor room. If we were going to incorporate stormwater into this solution, that might look like this. So the dry creek beds are a very common strategy to manage stormwater and infiltrate into our soil. We'll be talking a lot about that in the next session, but probably there's a downspout off this corner of the house. And so you make a little swale to pull that water down away from the house and give it a spot to infiltrate where it's not going to cause damage to the house. In this case, we have a little smaller outdoor room. It's always nice to kind of think about an accent, just some kind of interest. This could be, a bubbling urn, a colorful glazed pot with colorful plants spilling out of it. I had one participant that like to travel. So on one of their travels, they bought a sculpture from a favorite artist that they had that they were aware of. So think about, is there an opportunity to provide this, what we call a focal point or an accent in your yard? In this solution, you can see that they're only need to get access around the house on one side. So this is kind of a dead area with no gates, and then no need for anybody to get back there to read a meter or anything. So solution with stormwater. If you have maybe you just need that better pathway. Maybe you have this really small front walkway. You can see this one comes off the driveway, and you want something a little bit more grand as the replacement. This might be a good strategy where you still keep this smaller piece of the pathway from the driveway, but then maybe this piece gets a little bit more grand and a little bit more better sense of entry. This one has screening plants. So whatever's happening next door in the neighbors, they maybe don't want to look at. Only the need to get around on one side of the house for the trash cans and other storage. So another solution that would be a passageway solution. And then a view garden might look something like this. So maybe you're that person that likes the pollinator plants and you want to bring the butterflies and hummingbirds into your yard and have your window open to look out onto a little scene. You can still bring in some of those taller plants to provide some separation. And then we do these little islands of plantings around and just little maintenance pathways to meander around. You can put a little bench out here too, so it would be some quasi room, but that's how that solution would look. So we ask you to think about how you want to use that front yard and then reflect that in just some of these very easy first pass spaces. So we say form follows function. You're going to create that planting area bubble plan or concept diagram plan. This is our case study house. So you can see we've got the public sidewalk there, and then, you know, that main walkway to the door. There were a couple little pavers, so a secondary pathway over to the garage. And at first you start by just identifying the larger planting areas, right? And deciding what's you know, patios or hardscape and what's planting. And then we would come back and start to divide up those planting areas into our tall, our medium, and our low plants. And always nice to kind of vary the heights of plants so that you can really appreciate the different colors and forms they have when they're arranged like that. And when we put the low plants close to walkways, just like in that case study design, it makes the walkways feel a little bit wider. If somebody needs to step off the walkway, maybe there's a wheelchair coming down the other way and it's taking up the whole area, then they can easily step off for a minute and step back on. So it makes that walkway feel a bit wider and more welcoming. So we tend to have low plants along walkways, then the medium-sized plants, and then if we need tall plants, those would be in the back. And then you kind of continue on of starting to design your hardscape. So this was a pretty basic design, but they brought in some boulders to add some interesting accents, and they've got this kind of more enhanced walkway and landing and some little pots. So you can move into a hardscape plan. We'll talk a little bit more about, you know, how you go from these bubble diagrams into a hardscape plan and thinking about different forms in the next session. So, you know, as you're exploring your landscape design, think about starting with this functional bubble plan, being aware of where your circulation routes are needed. You know, how are you going to get to your trash cans? Where are they going to be stored? Are there meters on the other side of the house that someone needs to walk to? Thinking about where your planting is going to be located and what general heights those are going to be. And then developing some hardscape and any other elements. And then be thinking about what elements you might like to include. I always like to research, you know, walk around the neighborhood, see landscapes that you really like in your neighborhood that maybe you want to take inspiration for something that your neighbors have accomplished well. Also to understand what plants are performing well. You know, when you live coastally, there's a lot of coastal influence that can really affect the growth of plants. Some plants don't like the salinity of a ocean exposure. So be thinking about that and kind of assessing the area. So again, form follows functions. We'll be talking a lot about forms next time, but starting with overlaying on your base and then kind of focusing on this concept bubble diagrams. All right. Should we watch the video? And then if anybody has questions, I guess we'll take them after the video. We're a pretty good time. So we will get going with this.
If you're playing your video, did you remember to check your box?
Hello,
I did.
everyone.
Should be.
I've noticed that
Fingers
some of
crossed.
you are having a hard time
I'll stop
with
if need
the kind of conceptual bubble diagramming. So I thought I would put together this little demo so that hopefully this will help you through this process. So on my screen, you can see a pretty typical residential site. This is at
Or
1/8
I did
scale. So that gives you a sense of, you can see that
I apologize.
hard
I'm
time
going to have to
with
stop and
the
share for a
kind of
minute and
conceptual
restart
bubble
it. I think when
diagramming.
I did that earlier, I did it the first time, but not the second time. Share sound. Oh, I know what's going on.
I think it was working. I could hear you.
I hooked up. I apologize, everyone. Come on. All right, let's try this.
So I thought I would put together this little demo so that hopefully this will help you through this process. So on my screen, you can see a pretty typical residential site. This is at 1/8 scale. So that gives you a sense of the property, pretty typical for our urban environment. And when I start the bubble diagramming phase, I like to have some extra sketch paper available to me so that I can just overlay and be real loose and free and not worry about messing up my original base plan. So on this, you can see that this particular house, driveway pulls right straight into the garage, small, actually not such a small walkway right up into the door, one lawn area located to one side of the driveway and then a smaller one on the other side. And there's also quite a few existing trees on this location. So when we start the bubble diagramming phase, we really like to think about those different strategies of what you're going to use with this new space. In this example, I think there's a nice opportunity right in here where it's a little protected by the house to create a more private space. And then maybe this part is more of a view garden that's closer to the street. And then this also kind of picks up with some of the same plant material on both sides of the driveway. So we'll kind of sketch that out first as a solution. And then we'll maybe work on a quick version with stormwater being integrated into it. So I like to start with colored pencils. You can steal your children's colored pencils if you want from school. I always enjoy having a nice fresh set at home to have handy for such sketching adventure. I'm going to grab a few colors here, just grabbing some colors. So first I want to make sure that I'm addressing my site circulation. For this solution, which is going to be an outdoor room and part view garden, I'm not going to really change the circulation too much. Now, it could be that maybe I want a little wider driveway. You can be thinking about if you're removing lawn and it runs right up to the driveway, it's pretty easy to stand on that surface. But if you're changing that lawn into something else, you might not be able to stand on that landscape well. So I'm just going to do some quick kind of circulation patterns of how I would expect my visitors to maybe enter my house. So this is kind of my main pedestrian path of travel into the property. I could color it if I want real quickly. Again, I'm being very loose and free, and we're not drafting. We're just kind of thinking about where we're going to need to go. So maybe I have a gate on both sides of the property. So I also probably need some kind of secondary circulation, maybe through a gate that's over here. Right, so I want to be conscious of that. Maybe over on this side, I have another gate. So I want to make sure that I kind of design for that. Again, a smaller secondary path of circulation. Right, maybe there's another gate over in here. So now I know where people are going to move through the landscape. I can start really thinking about dedicating those outdoor room spaces. So for the first part, which maybe will be an outdoor room, a lot of people have a window right out the front and they keep their blinds closed all the time. So sometimes it's nice to be able to put something interesting to look at right outside that window, so that you can kind of take a peek at it, keep your blinds open and have set a view outside your window. And hopefully that's a view. And this is just a kind of a symbol for like a focal point. Could be a bubbling urn. It could be a beautiful glazed pot with flowers, a specimen succulent plant, or a small flowering tree, something like that. And then I'm just going to create kind of the boundaries of this outdoor room. And then this area, right? So this is going to be my use area. Maybe since this is, I can see from my north arrow, an eastern exposure, maybe I'm a morning person and I just want a little patio to sit and enjoy the morning soft sunlight, and read my paper or read a magazine or look at my social media in the morning. So I'm just going to quickly put a little bubble diagram here, and I can label this. So this will be my focal point. This will be my outdoor room. This is our, let's say, maintenance path. As is this. This will be my main path. Now, what to do with this extra space? Well, maybe I have neighbors who have a lot of big vehicles or trash cans over there that I'm not so excited to look at every day. So maybe I want some screening along that edge. So I could create kind of a bubble along here that I want to screen my property from my neighbors. Right. So you see, I'm not really scaling anything. I'm not drafting anything. I'm just trying to think about how I'm going to use this really great space that I now have to work on my property. And then this front is going to be my view garden. So over in here, let's start by kind of penciling it in. Maybe I have shrubs I don't like in this area, so I want to think about this whole area as a whole. And I'm going to circle over in here. It's a view garden. And then, of course, I want to protect my trees. Maybe this is a really wonderful big tree that I certainly want to work around and be careful how I remove the base of it, but a nice tree to sit under and have a canopy over me, and maybe even hang some lights there. And then just say these are trees I want to keep too. So we're going to work around all the trees on this property. Just kind of pulling them onto this overlay so I can keep track of where they are. So I'm really kind of replanting the understory and over in here. So on this one, maybe I want some, a group of planting that's kind of medium height along in here, right? That's going to provide a little bit of privacy for this area. Not as tall as a screening shrub, but just enough so that there's a little bit of a barrier between people being able to look in my windows so that I can keep this open so I can enjoy the view out my window without worrying about passersby looking in. So I'm going to say that these are medium-sized planting. And then maybe I'll add some medium-sized plants over here, maybe along the back so I get that layered effect. And then maybe along the front, I have some, let's say lower plants in here. So these are going to be a variety of lower plants. These might be ground cover. It might be some specimen plants in there. Maybe I want to have some boulders right at the entry so I can kind of set in some of those. Maybe I'll put a couple over here to kind of provide some interest. Sometimes that's nice with lower water plants where they sometimes don't look their best year round. We'll talk about that tonight on planting selection. But that would be an example of a bubble diagram for a typical residential house. And hopefully you guys saw that that wasn't very overwhelming to do. So I'm going to do a quick another one. This time I'm going to do a similar strategy. Maybe I'm not going to have an outdoor room this time. I'm going to focus on stormwater and creating a dry creek bed. And I have my downspout location in this area. So maybe I know that I don't need to walk on this side. My pathway is going to remain unchanged. I'm saying that this works for me, that I don't feel a need to create a pathway design to make a grand entry. And then maybe I only need to get around to one side of the house. So I'm going to put my maintenance pathway over in here, my gate, but I don't need one over here. So maybe I know that from my site assessment that I have a downspout right here that it's draining. I can either intercept it and move it away, or I can, if it's got an underground pipe, I can break into that pipe and use that water, interrupt it, so I can start infiltrating the water. Now I want to be at least really 10 feet away from the house is what I like to be. My scale out, here it is. I'm going to set mine at 10 feet minimum away from my house. I'm probably going to go out beyond that. I want to be 3 feet away from driveways and 3 feet away from hardscape. So I've got this kind of envelope. So I want to pull water away from the house, and I want to just kind of bring it down into the yard. So I might have a kind of a basin down here. So this basically becomes my stormwater feature. Like that. Just going to kind of snake around. And this might be a dry creek bed. Now this kind of opens up a pocket for either a display of planting. So maybe in this one it's a view garden. So I might have some pockets of the medium sized planting. If I still needed screening shrubs, I could integrate them along here between my neighbors. Maybe I'm going to put some pockets of medium shrubs here. And then maybe, let's see, maybe I just want a little area just for maybe a small bench out here. So I'm going to make a little tiny room so I can enjoy my little kind of natural creek bed here. Bring it right up to the sidewalk. So there's my outdoor room. And then maybe the remainder of the shrubs stay nice and low. Again, I'm trying to think of this as one big space. I have just a low plane of ground covers here. Maybe I'll have a couple kind of bigger spots. It's just a few shrubs right over in here. So hopefully it's just quick and easy for you. I'll label this. This is my dry creek. To write on the So note that I've dug my dry creek right through the tree, which means that tree is not going to survive the grade change through here. So this strategy would work well if we were going to remove the tree. Maybe it's a problem tree that's starting to, cause damage to the house or the paving or something. I know a lot of you guys have that condition. We've got our dry creek here. I've got a small outdoor room. Here's my main path. And a kind of a maintenance path. And we'll say low planting. This is my screen. And medium planting. Okay, so there are a couple quick bubble diagrams, and that's kind of gets you going with design. And if you don't get beyond this for your design coaching, if you have this and a plant list and maybe some photographs of landscapes you enjoy, your coach is going to do a pretty good job at being able to take it from here. So I will see you all tonight. Enjoy playing with your new space.
Right. All right, so just quickly, some resources as we wrap up this session. If you were to go onto this website, there are some great landscape resources for you. We're going to talk about some of those plant palettes and templates, and I know Christina has a couple of the templates on her website too. But those videos on demand, I think if you're confused by any of the concepts we kind of raced through at the beginning, like maybe you want to know more about soils or, see kind of some of those irrigation retrofits in a longer time frame, there's some great videos there that you can watch to support. All right, so that I'm going to turn it over to Janine if there's any questions, and Christina to wrap up the evening session.
We do just have one question, and it is a very good question actually. Can you recommend any good barriers? So when people install their Waterwise landscape, where it butts up to a neighbor, if they still have lawn, can you recommend anything that would be like a good divider?
Yeah, so I really like, there's some Permalock is the company that makes an edging, and they make it out of like aluminum, and there's different colors. You can buy the silver aluminum, you can buy the anodized where it's kind of a dark color. I found there's different depths to it, but I found that can be a pretty good like mow curb edge without being a concrete, divider like you would typically, a lot of times people put around their yard. We use that a lot professionally. I know it's also stocked by some of our supply houses like Ewing Irrigation and Site One Irrigation. I believe both stock that product. So you might have to venture out to where the landscape industry shops. We'll talk about that a little bit next time too, as we look for some implementation tools for you at the end of design.
Okay, that's the only question that we have for this evening. So everyone's homework for tomorrow can be to come up with some questions and we can ask them to Michelle.
Yes.
We always learn a lot when other people have questions. So that's about it for tonight. Does that work for you, for Michelle and for Christina? Are we about to sign off?
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming on, and I'm excited for tomorrow.
Okay.
Yes, so we will see you tomorrow night, and we will talk about how to use landscape design as some strategies to solve problems in your landscape. And there's a number of different things that we solve with landscape. How do we manage stormwater in our landscape design? And then just some of the materials and the plant materials that will help support your efforts to rethink your yard. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Thank you so much. And same time, same place tomorrow. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Janine.
Good night.
See you tomorrow. See you, Christina. Share.